welcome to an exclusive hour-long special with me, Alex Belfield, talking to one of my favourite people, Paul Merton. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you very much indeed. I'm very well indeed.
It's nice to see you because you're always funny, and I like that about you.
Oh, that's good. That's put the pressure on for this interview then, isn't it?
Well, it's interesting. You're funny, but you don't like to laugh. Well, not very often, anyway.
I suppose, yes, when I'm doing television thing, I do sort of, I do laugh a lot in normal life. But there is something to be said for sort of, if you keep a sort of straight face when you're saying something funny, you get an extra laugh because you look as if you don't get the joke yourself. So that just adds to the laughter, really. It's as cynical as that.
I'll tell you what's great about you. You seem to be so quick and quicker than everybody else. Nobody ever seems to get one over you, which is such a skill. How did you develop that?
I don't know. I suppose being at school, you know, I was sort of one of those kids who, when I was about 8 or 9, I knew every joke going in the Beano, you know, but then when I got into my teens, I started sort of like, I suppose what we call ad-libbing or improvise, and just making stuff up with people, and just, I've been doing that all my life, really, so it's sort of, it's a honed skill, if it is a skill, and that's where it comes from.
One of the things I love to do is coming down and see one of your shows at the Comedy Store when you've just got those nights where anything can happen.
The Comedy Store Players, yeah, every Sunday and Wednesday, yeah.
Why do you bother putting yourself through that? I mean, wouldn't it be easier just to get an act, do 10 minutes and clear off instead of having the danger of being booed off if you're not funny?
Oh, well, you've always got the danger of being booed off just doing the stand-up, you know, but I think the reason why I do the Comedy Store Players show every week is because it's a social thing. There's 6 of us do the show. It's always completely different. I was a stand-up many years ago, but I did find it a little bit it is a little bit lonely. You know, and it can be, you know, and I wasn't one of those people that enjoyed listening to myself on stage for 2 hours. I mean, some people love it and it's written into their DNA, but I'm not one of them really. I prefer in sharing the gig with people and then sort of sharing the after gig stuff with people as well. So with stand-up, it's not always that easy.
I always think it's interesting. I talk to a lot of comedians because I'm so passionate about comedy. I'm more of a gag man myself. I like a punchline. And we'll talk about that in a minute regarding the new book of silent comedy. When you put yourself in that arena, something like Jongleurs or the Comedy Store, you've got to be insane to want to do that because they can turn on you, and they do. And that presumably is the worst feeling in the world.
Yes, it is. It's pretty bad because you know you've set yourself up as somebody who's trying to be funny, and the audience aren't enjoying it. I hopefully now I don't often play to many drunks. That's the problem. You see, we go to a late night club, Saturday night, Friday night sort of thing, midnight show or whatever. Then people are going to be a little bit the worse for wear, and trying to sort of deal with a drunk heckler is not easy because they're so drunk they don't even understand that you're putting them down. You know, so
it can be funny to a point, but it can also be distracting for the audience. And I've also seen that happen where the audience turn on the audience, and that's even worse than them turning on the comic.
Yes, exactly. yes, exactly. I did a gig about 20 years ago at a club in Brixton, and there was 2 guys in the front that were sort of just heckling every act, and every act had a really hard time. So I did was I took the audience out of the pub, out into the car park where there was a light, and there was about sort of 40 people who gathered around me, and I did my act out there. So I couldn't get rid of the heckler, so I moved the venue.
I suppose that's one way out of it, isn't it?
Exactly.
We're going to talk about your life and career. We're going to talk about the new book on silent comedy as well, and the TV series that went with it. I'm so fascinated by you because you're a very private man, and I don't blame you. You let your work speak for itself.
Yes.
Are you happy on the other side of the desk, or would you rather be sat in a TV studio where you're just being funny?
No, I'm not sure I understand the question, really. What are you asking?
Well, a lot of comedians don't like being funny when you ask them to ad-lib.
Oh, right,
or
yes,
a lot of comedians don't like talking about themselves because they're a character. I remember my disappointment the first time I interviewed Julian Clary. He seemed so sad and so unfunny. The second time I interviewed him, he was slightly better, but there's something kind of tragic about comedians. You seem to be laughing a lot. That's a relief.
I don't know. There is a sort of, it's a bit of a myth that, Julian just might have been having a headache or something, might have been having a bad day. But I think it's a bit of a myth that comedians are necessarily depressive sort of people. You get certain types of people who are, you know, who would be depressive plumbers if they were plumbers. It seems that it's an interesting sort of idea because the notion that the funny person is actually crying inside appeals to our sort of sense of opposites. But most comedians I know are actually sort of no more bonkers than anybody else.
I think it's harder for the newer comedians to do interviews like this. If you interview somebody like Ken Don, he can go, ha ha, ha ha, and suddenly he's into the act, and it's the act, and you get that for the interview. Yeah. I mean, you are you, really. I don't see you as an act, because
no, that's good.
You come across as a real person, which is different, isn't it, from the old style?
I suppose so, yes. I mean, but you had to be a sort of like, Ken Dodd, wonderful comic, larger than life, and when he started off in the 50s in the musical, playing big sort of theatres that weren't very full of people, you had to be sort of quite large and to get your comedy across, I think. I can still remember with great affection jokes that he did on the radio about sort of 40 years ago that made me laugh. Man walks into a shop and somebody says to him, "You're a bit toffee-nosed, aren't you?" He says, "I can't help it. It's toffee on the end of my nose." I remember that when I was about 11 when I heard that. And so it's funny how sort of jokes, sometimes jokes just stick with you.
He was the first comedian I ever saw that made me want to be interested in comedy. I found him so curious, and I still to this day, whenever I meet him or go and see his show, I'm fascinated by his ability. He's really of that old school that he loves it and lives for it, which is tremendous.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, he's he's a working comic. He wants to keep on working, and if you are a comedian, it does make sense to keep sort of working live. That's partly one of the reasons why I do the Comedy Store, just to keep sort of match fit for when you're doing television programmes.
What about the fact that comedy kind of comes and goes, certain styles come and go? He's managed to last. Yes. I feel some of the comedians today, Russell Brand, who I'm about to do an hour special with, I wonder whether he will still be around in 5 years, able to get away with that free thinking, isn't it? That's his style.
Yes. Well, he seems to be sort of very, very on top of what he's doing, so I should think he probably would be around in 5 years' time. I don't know. I don't know how sort of... Russell's managed to do it in the last couple of years. How you go these days from being sort of like a fairly anonymous comic to being a well-known one, because there's just so many people doing it. Every year when I go to Edinburgh with the improv show that we do, you see a whole bunch of posters up on the wall in the venue, and they're completely new people I've never heard of. And last year there was a whole bunch of completely new people that I hadn't heard of then either, and before that. So there's hundreds of people doing it. So how you ever sort of get spotted or stand out from the crowd, I don't know how you do it. I suppose I have no idea, actually. I just don't know. I mean, when I started off doing I was very lucky when I started off doing stand-up comedy, because the only venue going was the Comedy Store. So when that closed down for about 18 months, and that's when all these other places like Jongleurs and the King's Head and Crouch End opened up as comedy clubs to serve that audience was no longer, was no longer going to the Comedy Store. So when I started, I was able to phone up Jongleurs and say, well, I've done the Comedy Store, then I could phone up somewhere else and say I've played Jongleurs. So it was very easy to get bookings, and there weren't many comics around. Often I would be on a bill with maybe a poet, a juggler, a mime artist, a guitarist, and I'd be the only comic on the bill. I mean, those days only lasted about sort of 4 or 5 months, I think. But it was a very good time to be doing it. But now, I mean, somebody was telling me the other day, you have to sort of, some of the big venues, you go to do an open spot, and 6 months later, you come back and do another one, if you're any good 6 months beforehand. And so how you build a career doing that, I don't know.
It's also fascinating when you read people's autobiographies like Graham Norton, who admits that he doesn't write jokes, he's an actor, and he's given jokes. And Ricky Gervais, I think, is the same. He's not a stand-up comedian, he's never tried to be, although he's selling out arenas now being a stand-up.
Yes.
So is he acting being a stand-up then?
Well, I haven't seen his stuff, so I imagine so, yes. I mean, stand-up's one of those things, there's much more to it than appears obvious from the surface of it, It's not just a question of standing up and saying jokes. I don't know, if people have spent a lot of money to go and see Ricky, I imagine they've invested a lot of, they've invested the money and they've sort of invested some of their emotion into it. So they want it to be a good gig, so they want to have a good time. So, I don't know, if they see him doing stand-up and they're happy with that, then the world is a happier place.
It does seem to me, Paul, that if you're well known, it is easier to get the laughs, providing you've got some decent material, than if you're unknown, because they're kind of in on your act and your style and who you are, therefore will laugh quicker.
Yes, I think that's true to a certain extent, because when I used to go on the do the stand-up, you try and make an impression very early on. You try to first 10 seconds would have the best joke I had. And that sort of settles the audience down. And they think, oh, okay, that was funny, so maybe this guy's going to be all right. Now, I suppose I wouldn't have to do that if I was to do stand-up. But you've still got to deliver. You've still got to have the gags, I suppose. But yeah, it's got to be a lot easier once people have come specifically to see you.
Presumably those first 10 seconds are very important if you're doing something like Jongleurs or the Comedy Store.
Yeah, exactly. I used to go out, my first gag used to be I used to start off by saying I'm a topical comedian. During the Blitz in the Second World War, My dad used to say, "Don't worry about the bombs. The only bomb you've got to worry about is the one that's got your name written on it." That scared the next door neighbours, Mr. and Mrs. Doodlebug. So that was my first joke. That usually went over quite well because Doodlebug's such an unexpected word to hear in a punchline.
We're back on your favourite local radio station. It's Alex Belfield talking to Paul Merton, the star of Have I Got News for You, the Comedy Store, and the brand new book, Silent Comedy. You're going to have to really help me with this, Paul, because I love comedy, but I don't get silent comedy.
Yes. Well, I think you've probably only ever seen it on television. Because it's as good as it can be on television. It's so much better in the live experience. I first saw a Buster Keaton film called The General when I was 13 years old, and it had a live accompaniment, a big screen, a big audience, and it's transformed. It is... It's very difficult to describe unless you've seen it. And what we've done in Bristol the last 3 years at the Bristol Silence show that we do, the first year we had 600 people, the next year we had 1,000, and last year we had 1,500. So it's leapt. So once people come to see it once, they're converted. But it's sort of, if you see it on television, often you've sort of got a poor organ score, some terrible organ music, or the print's wrong, or it's shown at the wrong speed, or it's missing bits, or the print is too dark, and so many different things can go wrong. You know, Channel 4 used to show some Buster Keaton films, and some of the music was just appalling. I didn't bother watching them myself. It can make such a difference. I'm doing a tour, not tied to the book, but we're going on a tour where we're showing some silent films around the country. One of them is we're going to show the full feature-length Harold Lloyd film Safety Last, which is the one where he's climbing up the side of a building and ends up hanging on the end of a clock. Now, when you see that film with an audience, the last 25 minutes of the film is him starting his climb up the side of this building. And audiences get so involved in it. And when we showed it at Bristol a couple of years back, a woman in front of me suddenly leapt up halfway through this building climbing sequence and shouted out, "Stop it, I can't stand it." And the build-up of tension and the laughter is extraordinary. And it's an experience. It's not like a normal cinema experience. The difference between watching a silent film in its proper environment, a silent comedy's proper environment, and watching it on television is like the difference between hearing music on beautiful speakers or listening to it under 6 feet underwater. You know, it's a completely different thing. So you should come along and have a look. Well, the clock sketch that you talk about did make me laugh. It's the Laurel and Hardy stuff I don't get. I've watched a few of your programmes on BBC Three, and it's been fascinating to see you describe your take on everything. Yeah. Could it work today? Silent comedy is an unfortunate term in some respects. I prefer visual comedy in many ways. But I don't know. I mean, there are people, there's still silent visual comedy still exists in comedy today. Bits of, maybe The Office was full of looks to camera and stuff. So it hasn't died out. It's just it's been absorbed within the mainstream of what comedy is. But I much prefer the visual joke to the verbal joke. A verbal joke is difficult to remember after you've seen an act. You know, you may remember. You know, you may sort of think, I remember laughing a lot, but I can't exactly remember what they were saying. But if you see a verbal thing, like in One Foot in the Grave, when Victor Meldrew reaches down to pick up the phone, and it's a small sausage dog. That image is just hilarious. So I love the well constructed, surprising visual gag. I think it has more of an impact on us than a written one. You're right as well. The Office and Curb Your Enthusiasm have really worked on that because there's no canned laughter to kind of fill the gaps. They let you get the joke yourself. Yes, which is also sort of what is refreshing about silent comedy is that when you're seeing a good film in with the right print and all that right sort of quality print at the right speed and all that sort of stuff, the laughter can just build and build and build because there's no dialogue to get in the way. So you can actually build up a tremendous atmosphere. So what's your favourite form of comedy? Is this it then, the subtleties of silent comedy? No, I have no favourite. There's all different kinds of comedy, Jewish humour, Irish humour, the stuff of Charlie Chaplin or Groucho Marx, or Monty Python or Tony Hancock, or it's just there's such a wide. I mean, I just like good stuff. I like stuff that entertains me. It's interesting, like the Jewish humour, when you look at Mel Brooks and Jackie Mason, people like that. It's acerbic, and even Joan Rivers. It's almost as if people like Paul O'Grady have almost encapsulated that, although they're not even Jewish. Yes. It's that same kind of... Well, yes, there is that sort of like... There's sort of that attack behind it, behind the delivery as well. Well, Paul's very funny, It's... he is spontaneously funny in an awe-inspiring way.
The new book is called Silent Comedy. It's in your stores now. It's written and illustrated brilliantly. It's a really fascinating read. It's one
good.
for the dads for Christmas, definitely, isn't it?
Yes, well, I hope so. I mean, also, I hope it sort of, in some way, points people towards the films. So, there's some stuff in there which only appeals to about 3 or 4 people in the world, I think. It's just so detailed. But I try to make it sort of, like, accessible to the general reader who may have heard of these people, but and heard that they used to be sort of enormously popular, but don't know why. Because you can look at Chaplin now, people are here that he was once considered the funniest man in the world, but often you look at particularly the very early films and you can't see any evidence of that. If somebody says the Beatles were the greatest band in the world, it's easy to demonstrate because you can just play the music and the best of it hasn't dated, and neither has with these films. But they, as I say, they need to be seen as cinema rather than television, I think.
Let's go back to your childhood. When did you first become interested in humour, and when did you first laugh? Can you remember the first joke that made you howl with laughter?
Yes.
That's sad, isn't it?
No, it's quite a good joke. I can't remember the very first joke, but I remember this is one of the first I remember. There's 2 flies playing football in a saucer. Do you know this joke? 2 flies playing football in a saucer. And one saying the other says, "Why do we keep practicing?" The other one says, "Well, we're in the cup next week." Now that, when I was, I suppose I was about 7 or 8. That was hilarious. That was hilarious for me. And I used to be that kind of person, that kind of kid that, what's white and yellow and travels at 120 miles an hour, train driver's egg sandwich, and just things like that. Jokes from the Beano, which, just old corny things like that, which I would trot out, and I would have a memory, an incredible memory, more so than anything I ever learned at school. I'd have a memory for these gags. I
think probably my favourite comedian was Bob Monkhouse, who was, I know he's referred to as the comedian's comedian, but his ability to just pull a joke from nowhere and have that almost Rolodex in his mind of ABC of jokes.
Yes, absolutely.
Incredible.
He was astonishing at that, and I think he was somebody who became a better comedian as he got older, funnily enough, because some of his earlier stuff in the 70s and 50s is a bit cheesy if you look back on it, but as he sort of developed a sort of rougher edge to him, or a harder edge to him, and it really suited him.
I love that box set they brought out recently of this stuff at the lakeside, which was far more crude than you would anticipate. It's not Jim Davidson crude, but it's still quite crude.
Yes, yeah. Well, you tailor them. He was a great expert at tailoring the material to the audience, I think.
What about the type of jokes that you just mentioned, and the jokes like, I went into the pub, I said, "Can I have some food?" and she said, "We only got scampi." I said, "Oh, I love all the Disney films." Those silly old-fashioned jokes. Is there anybody able to get away with those today and they still be cool?
I don't know.
I suppose Peter Kay slips some in, but he's doing them for irony, isn't he?
I'm not that overly familiar with what he does. I really don't see a lot of contemporary stuff.
Are you not interested by the new comic?
When I was sort of, before I got into television, I was an avid follower of comedy. If there was a new series started on ITV or whatever, new comedy series, even if the first episode was rubbish, I'd watch the second one just to give it a chance. I would be aware of everything, But since I started appearing on television and doing it myself, it completely lost all fascination for me. I suppose it's the busman's holiday thing or something, but it just sort of, I watch documentaries, or Strictly Come Dance is my favourite show at the moment. So I don't think, watching Bruce work, I love, it's great fun.
Men shouldn't like watching programmes like that.
Well, if you watch Strictly Come Dance, and what some of the women are wearing is designed to hook the male viewer.
I saw Letitia Dean on a programme the other day. It was verging on pornographic. I couldn't believe it. Who'd have thought she got legs like that?
Yes, she's not one of my favourites, I think, in this particular competition.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
All right, okay. We're not going to go down the Strictly route, or we'll be here for hours.
Yeah.
So comedy today then isn't of great interest to you. So what do you like watching? Is there anything that you do kind of fascinate yourself with, or are you just looking at the old stuff through the silent comedy and things like that?
I have got into sort of, since the advent of the DVD, I've really got into movies. I mean, it's the DVDs really helped the silent film genre in a way which nobody could have predicted, because you can release these films with a new musical soundtrack in stereo and stuff, and actually, and digitally enhance the pictures and stuff. What do I watch? I don't watch a lot of telly. It would tend to be documentaries, perhaps, and the news, just because of having got news view, just having some idea what's going on. Football, sports, but even then I'm not avid. When England were playing the other day, I watched half of it and then went out. So it's funny, the more, perhaps even, going back to when I was talking about comedy, the more I do television, perhaps, the less I watch it as well.
What about this comedy thing then as a child? We've got your first joke. Were you known as a funny child?
To the social services I was. A funny child? I suppose, yes, I think so. I was one of those boys that used to make jokes at the back of the class rather than confront the teachers. So I'd sort of jokes amongst the sort of pupils at the back. I didn't have the nerve to take authority on at that point. Yes, I was. I think in my teens I was somebody that was practising being funny, and my Irish cousin Peter, people have asked him over the years because I knew him quite well in my teens, and he said I was like that then. So, yeah, I suppose going back to what I was saying earlier, I suppose it's just developing a skill by constantly doing it.
You didn't start in comedy, though. You had a proper job before you went to comedy.
Yes, well, this was, I mean, the major thing which happened was, of course, the opening of the Comedy Store, because when I wanted to, when I left school in about 1976, to be a comedian those days, which I wanted to be, your career options were either become a Butlins redcoat or a holiday camp, entertainer person, or go to work in working men's clubs in the north. But I was sort of like, a shy young boy from just outside London. I can't go live in Leeds. What are you talking about? And I wouldn't have been any good. So there was that, and possibly even fringe theatre were the only other option. So the Comedy Store is directly responsible, really, for my career and many other people, because for the first time you could go somewhere, complete democracy. It didn't matter whether you'd done it before or who you knew or whether you were a member of Equity and all this sort of stuff. You just got up on stage. If it worked, you got another gig. If it didn't, you tried again the following week. So that's what really opened up the possibilities, because at the time in the 70s, I was a comedian. I was a person wanting to be a comedian, but having no way of actually fulfilling that ambition at that time. It seemed to be as daft a thing to want to be as an astronaut. So the Comedy Store opened up that whole business. It was like being an astronaut before anybody thought of going to the moon.
So we know what we want to be, and how difficult was it to get there? Presumably you're either born with a funny bone or you're not.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe there is. I mean, I wouldn't like this. I don't know if it's just something you're born with, really. I think it's just practice. I think it's aptitude, and when you start off on stage, you're not particularly good. I didn't know what I was doing. The thing that sort of worked for me was I'd written this sketch about a policeman being given hallucinogenic drugs against his, he doesn't know he's been handed these things. So that was the first thing that got me going. But as a performer, I was fairly dreadful. But the great thing about this sketch was it was a funny sketch and it worked. But also I could write it down, so I could read it out. So I didn't even have to worry about forgetting it. Suddenly you're on stage going, hang on. And so it was as performance-proof as I could make it. So, and that worked, second times at the Comedy Store, it worked really well. But I didn't really know what I was doing, and I had the next 18 months with some fairly rough old gigs. I couldn't live up to the beginning.
It's a real skill to remember joke after joke, especially when you're going in different places, isn't it?
I suppose so, yes. I used to when I was doing the 20 minutes, because that's all I was ever doing back in the old days. I had my beginning sorted out, because as I was saying before, a good strong beginning is very important, and a good strong ending as well. You don't want to finish on da-da-da, and then nothing. But the bit in the middle was always a bit fluid, and it was never quite, it would come in different orders. But as long as I had my beginning and my end sorted out, the bit in the middle would kind of take care of itself. But you'd have little bits of paper when you tried a new bit of material. That was one thing. Whenever I tried a new bit of material the first time, it never worked. Ever. And sometimes you'd have to think, well, where have I gone wrong there? Sometimes it would be I hadn't given the audience enough information, or I'd made a leap that didn't make sense, and, I had to go back and sort of explain the joke a bit more. But most times, the first time I ever did it, nothing.
We're back on your favourite local radio station talking to Paul Merton today about his life and career. We're going to end by talking about Have I Got News For You, which is where most people know you from, and what I enjoy watching religiously. It's one of the few programmes that doesn't seem to care. It's not particularly politically correct, and you seem to be able to get away with stuff that other programmes don't. Presumably you've got very good lawyers. Yes,
I mean, there was something last week in which I made a reference to Anton Deck, which got a laugh. I didn't expect it to stay in. But they obviously took a view, well, they're not going to sue, so,
Do you come up with ideas and put them to the producers? How does it work in terms of content?
The content is, the last show that went out, there was a lot of good stuff that wasn't used, because it's, you're overrunning, you record about an hour and a quarter, hour and 20 minutes. Lots of good stuff I had wasn't used, but there was Ed Byrne was on the show, he had a lot of good stuff that wasn't used either, so it was, you sometimes think, that was a slightly better recording than that. But
does that not break your heart, though, when you know you've had a corker and then some editor takes it out?
Well, it's always, I always understand why it happens. I mean, sometimes in the past, I don't do it now, but I used to do this thing. If the show was going for a fairly dull stage, I'd try and get something going. and it would be funny or whatever. But the trouble is, they said we can't use that bit because we have to show the boring bit beforehand, otherwise it just comes out of nowhere. So I've learned to stop doing that. Just try and be funny when I know it's going to be used.
How difficult is it to do the show now? Angus was great at it, and now it's a completely different style because you get a new host every week. For me, it sometimes works and it sometimes doesn't work.
Yeah.
And you're kind of sat there opposite Ian, having to take the flak and the brunt of whether it works or not. Does that not compromise you a bit, that it's not the same show that you did originally?
Well, I personally, I'm having much more fun. A different person every week is automatically a fresh ingredient. If they're not, now people have come back and done it sort of half a dozen times or something, they're getting better at it. But if the person in the middle isn't so good, then you have to find ways around that and ways to make it work. And the person in the middle is only one element of the sort of 5 or 6 elements that make up the show. I personally, I'm much happier with it.
It's interesting because when you get somebody like Boris on, or the Bruce episode, which was just legendary,
Yes.
they stick out. I mean, like last week, it didn't stick out, but it was a brilliantly presented programme.
Yes, you can't have you can't have a sort of someone like Bruce or Boris every week hosting it because those people aren't out there. But I think Bruce is thinking of coming back for the next series because he's been doing the Strictly Come Dancers since he last came on, and I've been pushing for us to have a dancing element in the show.
Well, and you're such a big fan of the show as well. I mean,
Absolutely.
There's a question I've wanted to ask you for years and years and years, and you don't have to answer it. When Angus went, I got the feeling that you really weren't that fond of him. You exposed the T-shirt, and you kind of threw him under the bus with the front page on your T-shirt.
I pulled him out from under the wheels of the bus.
Do you feel that?
Yeah, because by turning the thing into a joke and everybody laughing at it, we move the sting from it and we can carry on.
It was a difficult situation because when you're mocking the news, when you then become the news, that puts you in a difficult position, doesn't it?
When Christine Hamilton starts scoring points off the person in the middle of the programme, which happened in the last show, that was quite a desperate moment.
It's a shame because he's so talented and he was so good at it, but his position was literally untenable, wasn't it? He couldn't carry on.
No, and then we all, no, he couldn't. And as I say, when Christine Hamilton starts getting the pulling the moral high ground over you or sitting in, it's just, and see, then you get into a thing where like what do you do then? Every guest comes on is going to mention it. So what do? Do you edit their comments out? In which case they say to the Daily Mail, "Oh, I said all this stuff about Angus Dayton on last week's show and it wasn't used. So therefore they're very good at handing it out, but and you're getting into all that sort of stuff and." It's just a nightmare. I mean, the thing with the T-shirt is actually that was towards the end of one series. There was then a sort of 3-month gap. And it was only when the new series started that other stuff came out. That's when it became a problem. The T-shirt itself was, saved him.
It was hysterical. Point. Your comic timing was brilliant, and it was probably the most funny moment ever on the show. But it must have been uncomfortable afterwards, or was he aware of it?
Well, he's thanked me for making it funny. So that was the only thing we could do. Well, in my view, and there was talking about, well, what are we going to, when are we going to mention it? I said, you've got to mention it right at the top of the show. You've just got to go for it because nobody will be listening to anything until we do.
Was there ever a point where you considered a permanent replacement for Angus?
I think there may have been amongst the people who make the show, but I don't think anyone really no one really was certainly in the early days did it in such a way we'd go, yes, you're definitely the person to do it. You could see the advantages of different people doing it, and no one person was sort of like stamped their identity on it in such a way where you say, well, no, it must be you. So I think now we've got a very competent and able group of people that can do it, regularly each series now.
What I love about it is the fact that it's the smartest of all of the quiz shows because every week the news changes, so it can go on forever. It's a brilliant format, isn't it?
Yes, I mean it is. If your raw material is the news, and of course, as you say, you've got this ever-changing landscape. Lib Dems are in the business of electing a leader at the moment, and there's always something happening. So yes, there's no reason why it shouldn't walk and walk.
Do you look forward to doing it? You look like you enjoy it, although your face doesn't always tell the same story.
Yes, no, I do. I do look forward to it, and it's great to be involved in a show that's still, after all these years, seen by a large number of people, and people are always complimentary about it. So to be associated with something like that, of course, is a dream, isn't it, in showbiz? That's what you want. It's something that a lot of people, that work you're proud of doing, a lot of people enjoy.
It's also interesting because it's highbrow, but it's still for everybody.
Yes, absolutely. absolutely. I mean, right at the beginning, it was always my thought, and I think this was shared by the other people working on the show as well, that you have to play to an intelligent audience. You have to assume your audience is intelligent and give them stuff that will appeal to an intelligent audience, and then you get an intelligent audience. So we tend to sort of, not highbrow, but at least we don't dumb down.
What's that Ian Hislop like then?
He's lovely, Ian. He's very good. I like him very much. And if you look at old copies of Private Eye from before he edited it, back in the 60s and 70s, I bought some at a junk shop the other day. It's absolutely an appalling magazine. Homophobic, anti-feminist, anti-women. Never mind anti-feminism. It was just terrible. And I've got great respect for Ian. I think he does a cracking job.
It's also one of those programmes, it doesn't matter who wins, it's almost irrelevant, isn't it?
You tell Ian that. He's desperate to win every week. Desperate. You watch his face when he loses.
It's been really nice talking to you today, Paul. A fascinating life, and you're one of those people that just keeps doing the business week after week, month after month, year after year, and you're always current. How are you treated by the public? Can you walk the streets without being harangued by young ladies whipping their tops off?
Not in summer, no. In winter, it's a different kettle of fish. No, people are just always friendly. They're always a smile, and I haven't had anyone say anything nasty to me for years. The only thing I do, I avoid pubs. Avoid people when they're drunk, because that's when it's difficult. Because they might like you, but in their confusion, that turns into violent hatred.
I get that all the time. Don't worry about it. The new book is out now. It's called Silent Comedy. It's a really great read and beautifully illustrated. Presumably, you're very proud of it.
Yes, I'm pleased with how it's turned out. I mean, myself as a 14-year-old boy would have loved this book as a Christmas present. So, and I've written books before, fictional work, and this was much harder, because with fiction you can just say anything you like in the end, but with this you have to kind of sort of back up what you're saying. But I think the key part of this book is hopefully it brings the films to life and gives you some idea of the people behind them, so they're not just still black and white shadows on a wall, but they were once living and breathing. Do
you have any ambitions now? Is there anything you want to achieve, or are you just happy plodding along the way you are, as successful as you are?
Yeah, I would like the one thing, but I'd have to sort of drop everything else really. One thing to do is I'd like to direct a film again. I directed a short film about 6 or 7 years ago. But to work, to work on a movie, you have to be completely 100% dedicated to it. And at the moment, I just haven't got the time. So that may be the one thing that I never do. But I mean, I've got a vague idea for a script which I've worked on before, but I just haven't got the time at the moment.
What about serious acting and things like that? Does that interest you, or moving into any other form of show business?
Actors are fairly low down on the food chain, in any production. So and actors are a funny bunch as well, Not all of them. Some of them are good, but some of them are moaning when they're not working, and some of them are moaning when they are working. Oh, do we have to come in at that time? And all this sort of business. And it wouldn't suit me.
It's not for you.
No.
And what about the ultimate chat show up against Paul O'Grady or something like that?
Well, I don't do Room 101 anymore, mainly because I can't pronounce it. I don't know. It's, again, you sort of, I mean, with that show, it was good to do because I always interviewed people I wanted to interview, and I think if you become a general sort of, I suppose you have to be interested in everybody. I don't know. I'll wait till the massive offers are made.
You did bring something new to Room 101, which I really liked as well. Your presentation style is so offensive, but funny and loving and warm at the same time. You've mastered that art of digging the knife in as deep as you can, but doing it with a loving smile. I think that's so tremendous.
Yes, oh, that's nice to hear.
Paul Merton's new book, Silent Comedy, is in your stores now. Thank you so
assassin.
much.
Thank you.
The Alex Belfield In Conversation podcast with daisymedia.co.uk.